On this episode, two medical mysteries that defied the experts.
Something is wrong with my child. Can somebody please just tell me what's wrong with my kid?
They kept saying, hey, wait, he'll grow, he'll grow. We waited, and he didn't grow.
When Ricky Getch celebrates his second birthday, it's all too clear that there's something very wrong. He weighs only 18 pounds and can fit inside a shoebox.
I always knew I was different than everybody else.
My biggest worry was that we would find out what it was, but we would just find out too late.
Then, when 2-year-old Haven Fowler begins to gain weight at a shocking rate, her parents find themselves in a desperate fight to save her life.
She had gone from 20 pounds to 43 pounds.
As a parent, it's heartbreaking. You feel completely helpless.
I thought, this is it. This is gonna be my last night with my daughter.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery.
In the spring of 1986, Yvette Qualls was finishing a degree in social work at a college in Tallahassee, Florida. While she spent most of her free time in church, she never expected to find romance there.
When we first met, I was 20 and Charlie was 25.
The thing that really attracted me to her to start with was she just radiated the personality that I was looking for.
We dated for 2 weeks and then got engaged. I was always considered the most level-headed person. For me to only spend 2 weeks with someone and then get engaged, that was just a little off character. But I just loved the way he thought about the world and the way he treated other people. We got married on January the 24th, 1987.
2 years later, the Getches are ready to think about becoming parents.
Charlie and I had started trying to conceive. We tried for over a year with no success. The next plan of action was that we go on a low dosage of fertility drugs. Everybody was asking us, well, when are you gonna have a baby? When are you gonna have a baby? Emotionally, it was really hard because I was really scared that it might not happen.
But just as Yvette begins to accept that she may not have a child of her own, she receives some thrilling news.
I went into the doctor's office and found out I was pregnant.
I was really excited to know that we were pregnant because of the difficulty we'd been through to have the baby.
On October 16th, 1992, Yvette goes into labor, and after 16 long hours, she and Charles welcome their son into the world.
We decided to name our baby Charles Frederick Getch Jr. after Charlie, and we decided to call him Ricky.
There's nothing compared to holding your own son or own daughter in your own arms for the first time.
I adjusted to the routine of being a new mom, I think pretty well, except for the lack of sleep.
The best thing I liked about being a father is being able to have him with me, we relaxing in front of the TV and both taking a nap. And if he moved, I was wide awake in a heartbeat.
But it's not long before the new parents notice something unusual about their son.
Ricky didn't feed very well initially. He had trouble latching on. I was nursing him every 2 to 3 hours. The problem was that he didn't take a lot at one time. So I was really concerned.
Worried that her son isn't getting enough to eat, Yvette makes an appointment with Ricky's pediatrician. However, the doctor is confident that nothing is wrong.
And he said, he seems to be pretty healthy. The doctor recommended that we just continue to feed him. I said, well, but he's really smaller than all the other babies that I have seen. He just kept telling us that, you know, he seemed healthy other than he was small.
But Ricky's sluggish appetite persists, and by the time he's 3 weeks old, the infant has gained only a few ounces. He's hardly bigger than an average newborn.
I could put his head in my hand and his feet would not even touch my elbow. Still, at 2 months, he was still fitting in my arm, and that concerned me. The doctors kept telling her to just wait, that he'd start growing.
With each passing week, the young parents begin to accept that their son may simply be petite. But one December evening, when Ricky is 2 months old, a frightening incident makes them reconsider everything.
I went back to the bassinet to check on him, and when I got back there, he was making kind of weird gurgling sounds.
There was mucus all over the place coming out of his nose, and that scared us, being new parents.
He was struggling to breathe, and so we knew it was an emergency. I think my biggest fear at that point in time was that Ricky might actually just stop breathing. Immediately, we grabbed Ricky and got in the car.
And I probably broke a few speed limits getting there, but he's my son, my newborn son. I had to get him to the hospital so he could get the proper care.
He sounded awful. We were just scared that he was struggling to breathe. I thought that we were going to end up in the hospital with a really, really sick baby.
When we finally got to the ER, they took him back, gave him a breathing treatment.
And the doctor told us that he had bronchiolitis.
Bronchiolitis is a common condition characterized by severe inflammation and mucus buildup in the lungs.
The treatment for that would be antibiotics. The doctor felt really comfortable that he was breathing fine and that if we went home with the medicine that he would be okay. Ricky did fairly well for about 4 to 5 weeks before he had another episode of a respiratory infection. When we took Ricky back to the doctor, he was just like, well, some kids get repeated respiratory infections. So the doctor didn't seem alarmed at all.
In fact, over the next 8 months, Ricky is hit by a bronchial infection again and again.
Ricky would get sick every 3 weeks. Instead of a kid getting older and getting better, what we saw was a child who seemed to be getting sick more and more and more often.
Making matters worse, Yvette can't help but notice that her son is still not growing.
When Ricky was 13 months old, he weighed about 16 pounds, 4 ounces. A regular baby will weigh 23, 24 pounds at a year. So Ricky was well under what he should weigh for that time. The doctor was like, well, you've got to remember, he's been sick a lot. He's had respiratory infections. Let's just see how he does when he starts not being sick so much. But I knew it wasn't normal for him to keep being sick. I went to find another pediatrician. He said all that mucus and the fact that he didn't gain weight, those are the symptoms of cystic fibrosis.
Cystic fibrosis is a genetic condition in which mucus builds up in the lungs. It initially causes breathing problems and eventually leads to severe lung damage and early death.
I was alarmed. I knew that if we had that diagnosis, that we were looking, at a kid that wouldn't even make it to 35. And that is the hardest thing that I think I went through. Ricky was tested for cystic fibrosis in January of 1994.
I was thinking, is he going to die?
In the fall of 1999, 24-year-old Misty Fowler was excited about starting a new job with an internet company in Maryland when she was introduced to the man of her dreams.
Chris and I met at work. He was a web designer. I was an assistant to the president.
Her boss said, this is Misty, and she's small, but she's mighty. We just had a connection. It was very natural and kind of quick.
We dated for 2 years before we got engaged.
We both really enjoy the outdoors and spontaneous nature of heading in a direction and kind of seeing where that takes us.
After tying the knot in 2001, Chris and Misty settle into married life. And one morning, 2 years later, Misty has some thrilling news.
I just looked at Chris and I said, we're pregnant. And we were just kind of screaming and we were completely overjoyed.
That initial feeling that we were actually finally having a child together was pretty exciting.
On January 26, 2004, Misty and Chris welcomed their daughter, Haven Christina, into the world.
I felt completely overwhelmed when I first saw her come out. You think you're kind of ready, and then complete overwhelming rush of emotions. It's a pretty magical moment.
They brought her over to me, and I don't think I let go of her for at least 3 or 4 hours.
Since the day their son Ricky was born, Yvette and Charles Getch have suspected that there's something wrong with him. At just under 2, Ricky Getch is the size of a child half his age and is plagued by constant respiratory infections. The family's pediatrician is confident that he's suffering from cystic fibrosis, a potentially life-threatening condition.
As a mom, waiting for results from tests are excruciating. To think that I could actually lose him, that we would only have that short amount of time, those kinds of fears for me were really hard.
But after 48 hours, the doctor has some welcome news.
The test came back, he did not have cystic fibrosis.
For me, that was like, thank God it's not cystic fibrosis. I know something's wrong with him, but it's not that. When Ricky turned 2 in October of 1994, Ricky weighed 18 pounds. 2-year-olds weigh anywhere from 28 to 40 pounds. So already Ricky was weighing 10 pounds less than the smaller kids his age.
I always knew I was different than everybody else because everybody was taller than me. Everybody always had a little bit more like muscle or fat on them, and I was just like skin and bones.
The problem was that Ricky only literally ate 3 to 4 bites of something and he was done. So I knew he wasn't getting enough calories.
It was a very constant battle, and we'd try to get him to eat more, and he'd start screaming.
When I was younger, sometimes I wouldn't eat as much because I'd get full really fast. I didn't get hungry, so I just wouldn't eat that much.
It was just hard as a mom knowing that you need your child to eat, and he just really wasn't hungry. Ricky didn't ask for food. I just knew in my gut. I knew that there was something wrong.
The scary part was the unknown. Didn't know what was causing it, and that's what really worried me.
Completely overjoyed, the young parents take their newborn home 2 days later and begin their life together as a family.
Haven was a very happy baby and perfectly healthy. She was hitting all of her developmental milestones on time, if not early.
Haven never had a flu or a cold or sniffles or any of the typical sicknesses. She was the picture of health.
In Haven's first 2 years of life, she was very spunky and loved to dress up, would wear plastic high heels and her little boas and run around the house like she was a fashion model.
Then, one day when Haven is 2.5, Chris and Misty are leafing through a photo album when they notice something odd.
Haven was always on the skinny side, and comparing the pictures, we noticed there was certainly something changing pretty quickly.
Haven seemed to be gaining some weight. We hadn't changed anything in her diet, and it seemed strange to me, so I decided I should take her to the doctor. He put her up on the scale and weighed her, and she had gone from 20 pounds the previous month to 43 pounds now. I was shocked. Her pediatrician felt that this could be a thyroid problem, causing her hormones to fluctuate and ultimately cause her to gain weight. And he told us that he would like to run some blood tests and go from there. I wanted something to be there because then I could fix it. 3 days later, I received a phone call from her pediatrician, and all of her blood tests were fine. The doctor told us that we must be feeding her too much and needed to cut back on her food.
Desperate for answers, Yvette goes from specialist to specialist, but no one can explain why Ricky isn't growing.
I was going on into 2 years, over 2 years, into a search of what was going on with my child. I'd taken Ricky to so many doctors. Ricky had had so many tests, and I'm sitting here going, something is wrong with my child. Can somebody please just tell me what's wrong with my kid?
They kept saying, hey, wait, he'll grow, he'll grow. But we waited. He didn't grow.
As time ticked on, my biggest worry was that we would find out what it was, but we would just find out too late.
As kindergarten approaches, Yvette and Charles are heartsick, knowing that in school, Ricky will be different because of his tiny size.
I knew that if Ricky didn't start growing, people would laugh at him, pick on him, and call him names.
In kindergarten, sometimes I'd have to have help getting into the seats because they were too high. I had this really bad bully. He'd pick on me, call me midget, all this stuff. I always felt like I was kind of like different than everybody. For the most part, that was the most frustrating thing about being smaller.
At 5 years old, he's still in baby clothes, basically. It's heartbreaking. I knew there was something wrong all along, but to see him was heartbreaking.
There was no doubt in my mind that there had to be something that was going on that people were just missing. So I went out on a search, and my search led me to Dr. Parks.
But to the Fowlers' surprise, after 3 months of dieting, Haven is still gaining weight.
It seemed like every 3 to 4 weeks I had to buy her almost a new wardrobe, and I didn't know what was wrong.
Unnerved by Haven's bizarre transformation, Misty schedules another appointment with the pediatrician.
He put her up on the scale, and she had gained another 15 pounds. I was very frustrated. The doctor now felt that it was a high possibility that Haven could have a tumor in the pituitary region of her brain.
The pituitary gland helps to maintain metabolism. If it malfunctions, patients may gain weight rapidly.
Hearing something like a brain tumor from your doctor is completely terrifying. You know, your job in life is to protect your child, and that's the last thing any parent wants to hear.
I first saw Ricky when he was 6.5 years old. His mom brought him for another opinion about the reasons for his failure to gain weight and to grow in height.
Dr. Parks looked at Ricky's charts, he looked at Ricky's history, and it was almost like, for the first time, I had a doctor who treated me as a partner in trying to find out what was going on with my kid.
Dr. Parks immediately notices something Yvette and Charles have always overlooked: the particular configuration of the features on Ricky's face.
Ricky had a normal-sized head and a small chin. At 6.5, he was about the size of a 3-year-old, but he was unusually thin. I concluded that Ricky had Russell-Silver syndrome.
Russell-Silver syndrome, or RSS, is a rare form of dwarfism. In healthy individuals, the genes that trigger cell multiplication control a child's growth. But in patients like Ricky, for some unknown reason, the genes turn off, stunting growth and resulting in extremely small stature.
I'd gotten kind of scared about just hearing the word Russell-Silver syndrome. I would just have to stop myself and say, God, you gave me a beautiful child. Please just let everything work out and let him be okay. What I found is that Ricky wasn't gonna die. While Ricky may be short, and while Ricky may never reach what we would consider to be, normal family height, what I did know from that is it wasn't a death sentence. That was the most important thing. If it was Russell-Silver, I could live with that. My concern was that if Ricky kept growing at the rate he was growing, that he wouldn't even be 5 foot tall when he was an adult.
Over the last 4 months, Misty and Chris Fowler have watched their once healthy daughter mysteriously triple in size. She's gained almost 40 pounds despite a highly controlled diet. Now, her pediatrician believes that a brain tumor may be triggering the rapid weight gain.
Hearing that she could have a brain tumor was horrifying. It just changes your world in a 30-minute meeting with a doctor.
Terrified, the Fowlers race Haven to the hospital, where she undergoes an MRI to confirm the doctor's hunch. The next 3 days are almost unbearable as they wait anxiously for the results.
Finally, we received a phone call and he told us that there was nothing. They found nothing. Everything looks great. There was no tumor. There was nothing out of place. There was nothing wrong.
To hear that the MRI was negative was a complete relief, and at the same time was very frustrating.
There was something definitely not right. But the doctor came back and said that we're not watching her diet close enough, that this is a parental issue and not a medical issue. And we just felt alone.
Discouraged, the Fowlers do the best they can to monitor Haven's diet even more closely. Then, when they least expect it, a terrifying incident sends the family reeling.
I heard a scream from upstairs, and I ran upstairs to see what was going on. And Haven was sitting up in the bed, and her eyes were open. She was kind of glassed over. She looked like she was still sleeping, but she was shaking. I tried to calm her down, and she whispered into my ear that there was a little girl in her bed. I told her there was nothing there, and she just had this look of terror in her face. And she told me, "No, Mom, there is a little girl in my bed, and she's bleeding, and she's smiling at me."
For a 3-year-old to say something like that, it's like ice through your veins. That was much, much more than a nightmare of even the worst kind. So I think we were as scared as her at that point.
Overwhelmed, Misty calls the pediatrician, but he assures her that there's no cause for alarm.
He told me at age 3, this is a very normal thing, and that she would grow out of it.
But she would wake up kind of every night or maybe every other night and kind of have like a night panic attack where she would think she sees something, and she started getting worse and more animated. She'd get out of bed and I'd find her standing up even though she was still seemingly asleep. One morning I went in to go check on Haven, and she was not in her bedroom at all, and of course this immediate panic, and I went kind of quickly checking through the house.
We found her on the couch sleeping, and next to her were 5 banana peels, 6 puddings, and 5 apple cores. We couldn't believe that she'd actually was able to eat this amount of food. But when we woke her up, she had absolutely no recollection of eating it.
Knowing that if she's eating in her sleep, everything kind of fell into place, and that was the cause of the constant weight gain. But the fact that she was actually taking things out of the fridge and eating, all while still in some kind of a dream state, was pretty terrifying. So we started coming up with our own ways to deal with her nightly behavior.
It came to a point where we had to put a bungee cord around the refrigerator so that she couldn't get into the refrigerator and eat in her sleep. Eventually, I slept next to her on the floor, and I tied a ribbon from my wrist to her wrist so that if she did get up, she couldn't go far without me knowing and feeling the tug on my wrist.
We would be taking turns kind of staying up on watch.
It was very hard on both of us. We hadn't been sleeping now for 5 months. We were starting to argue more because we were both exhausted.
But 2 months later, something horrifying happens that turns their world upside down.
I heard Haven snoring, and I've never heard Haven snoring before. So I walked into her room and could see her body's stiff and her back is arched, and she actually had foam over her mouth.
I heard Misty scream, and I ran upstairs and found Haven. I rolled her over, and her face was tense and clearly in distress. She wasn't sleeping. It was something completely different. I thought it was some sort of seizure. My first thought was to clear her mouth and clear her airway, but her jaw was locked tight and I could not get her mouth open.
All of a sudden, I could see that she had actually stopped breathing. Instantly, I thought, this is it. She's gonna die. This is gonna be my last night with my daughter.
While no other doctor recognized the condition, Ricky's lack of appetite and inability to grow are the main features of the disease.
I think the problems with weight gain are complex. Some of it's reflux, some of it's just a poor appetite. There's also the issue that the number of fat cells may be lower than that in the average child.
When we finally got our diagnosis, I was very happy because here he is, 5.5 years old. We finally find out what's wrong with him, why he's not eating, why he's not growing.
Dr. Parks goes on to tell the family that while most types of dwarfism are incurable, growth hormones have been proven to reverse Russell-Silver syndrome. There's a good chance that Ricky could be normal if they start the treatment right away.
My parents told me that I had Russell-Silver syndrome. They told me that I'd have to start taking all these shots and I wouldn't necessarily be as big as the other kids, but I knew that the shots would help me grow.
Dr. Parks also prescribes a drug to stimulate Ricky's appetite.
4 or 5 days after Ricky started that medication, he actually said he was hungry. For most parents, that wouldn't mean a whole lot, but for me, I'd gone almost 6 years. I'd never heard the words, "I'm hungry," ever come out of his mouth.
For so long, he was off the growth chart. And finally, he started easing back onto it, and that was a celebration for us.
I felt like I started catching up to my classmates in height and weight was probably around 4th and 5th grade. I wasn't the shortest anymore. One of the biggest moments about catching up in school was I used to have a bully, and I finally caught up to that kid and actually outgrew him. And one day I was just like, "See, you can't call me midget anymore. I'm bigger than you."
While they are thrilled with their son's progress, Yvette and Charles can't help but wonder why it took so long for doctors to diagnose Ricky.
At that time, there were no tests available to see whether he did or did not have that condition. Russell-Silver syndrome occurs in roughly 1 in 50,000 to 1 in 100,000 children.
I'm not sure why so many doctors miss this diagnosis. I guess because it's so rare. Probably a lot of doctors have not heard of it. The frustrating part of being on this long road to diagnosis was all the doctors kept missing it.
Ricky's always been such a fighter that I was really afraid that it could take an emotional toll on him.
When Ricky Getch was 6.5 years old, he was diagnosed with Russell-Silver syndrome, an extremely rare type of dwarfism that can be treated with growth hormones.
My hopes for getting Ricky treatment was that Ricky would get to be 5'4". That was my dream goal. 5'4" is normal height range in my eyes for a guy. It's a little bit short, but it worked.
Over the last 8 months, 3-year-old Haven Fowler has exhibited a bizarre constellation of symptoms. She's gained almost 40 pounds, experiences horrifying hallucinations every night, and has even started to eat in her sleep. While none of her doctors are concerned, the Fowlers are sure something is very wrong, especially when Haven goes into a seizure and suddenly stops breathing.
I was on the phone with 911 and Chris started CPR. We were going crazy. Chris stayed in the house with her. And I actually ran outside screaming for any of the neighbors to help. And then the ambulance and the fire trucks arrived. At that point was when I actually felt the relief because somebody was coming to get her.
Once the paramedics resuscitate Haven, they're shocked at how high her blood pressure is.
I just told him that we needed to fix her, that we couldn't let her just go, that we had to get to fix her.
They rush Haven to the hospital, where a team of specialists is waiting for her, including pediatric endocrinologist Dr. David Cook.
When she was admitted, the evaluation mostly was directed at making sure she didn't have an underlying seizure disorder. But what struck me most was her obesity, and her blood pressure was pretty strikingly above normal.
Dr. Cook suspects that Haven has a pheochromocytoma, a tumor that forms near the kidneys, which causes high blood pressure. To confirm his hunch, he orders a CT scan.
I was extremely hopeful that we would finally have an answer to what was going on with Haven.
But when Dr. Cook reviews the scan, he sees something thoroughly unexpected.
We were dealing with a completely different type of tumor. Haven had what appeared to be a neuroblastoma.
A neuroblastoma is a tumor of the adrenal glands or nervous system. It tends to spread quickly to other parts of the body.
The neuroblastoma is a type of cancer that children can die from and needs to be treated very aggressively. So the next step is to remove the tumor.
I was in shock.
As a parent, it's heartbreaking. You feel completely helpless.
2 weeks later, Haven is prepared for the operation.
They allowed me to walk to the table with her, and she actually was giving me some strength because she was so willing and so ready to do this. And she helped the anesthesiologist with her mask, and I gave her a kiss on the forehead and tried to retain my composure.
For 14 hours, Chris and I sat there in the waiting room. Finally, the surgeon came out and told us that Haven had done great during surgery. Everything went as planned, and we were discharged and sent home for Haven to recover.
The Fowlers are hopeful that Haven's problems are behind them. But as the weeks go by, nothing changes. Haven is still gaining weight and sleepwalking.
We were disappointed because we really hadn't changed anything. It was all still there. We called Dr. Cook and told him that all of the symptoms were still there and progressing, and he promised us that he would continue to search for a diagnosis for Haven.
Now that we've removed this tumor, but the symptoms haven't gone away, we're still left with a very complicated patient. So we took a step back and reevaluating all of the symptoms and findings that we had on Haven, and through some research into the medical literature, we discovered a very rare syndrome that could actually describe all of these features that Haven had. And so we were able to conclude that Haven has this syndrome called ROHAD.
ROHAD, or rapid onset obesity, with hypothalamic dysfunction, hypoventilation, and autonomic dysregulation, is an extremely rare disease which impairs brain function. Ordinarily, when a tumor develops, the immune system defends the body by attacking the growth. But in patients like Haven, for some unknown reason, this protective process goes haywire. Experts suspect Haven's immune system targeted the tumor, but then went after her brain.
The cause of ROHAD syndrome is unknown. And in fact, most physicians have not heard of ROHAD syndrome.
Now that we had a diagnosis, we knew what the name was, but it was again another shock of how do we have a disease that no one knows about?
Misty and Chris Fowler have just received shocking news. Their 3-year-old daughter, Haven, is suffering from a rare and dangerous disease called ROHAD. The condition attacks several parts of the brain, including the hypothalamus.
The hypothalamus is a part of the brain that controls a number of body functions, including our appetite control center. So injury would lead to excessive eating and rapid onset of obesity. And we think that this ROHAD process is injuring the parts of the brain that were controlling our sleep pattern. This damage to the brain would explain the night terrors that she demonstrated.
While it's unclear what triggered the seizure that Haven experienced, Dr. Cook believes that, in time, the disease started to affect more and more parts of Haven's body, including her autonomic nervous system.
The autonomic nervous system is the part of the nervous system that controls things like our blood pressure. So with autonomic dysfunction, the patient isn't able to keep those parameters where they should be.
As the Fowlers process all the information, they're faced with a grim reality. Without a solid diagnosis, eventually the disease would have affected Haven's ability to even breathe.
in a syndrome like ROHAD, the part of the brain that tells us to breathe isn't working. And so early on, it might just cause you to breathe slower than normally, but eventually it could cause you to actually stop breathing.
To hear from doctors that your child could just stop breathing was almost impossible to comprehend.
There is no cure for ROHAD. And because we don't know what the underlying cause of ROHAD is, there is no standard treatment.
To hear after all of that, well, there is no treatment for this, the ground just kind of falls away and you're just completely lost at that point.
While ROHAD has been identified, medical experts still don't understand the exact science behind the disease. As a result, patients are treated on a trial and error basis.
Based on the theory that ROHAD syndrome in Haven was caused by an autoimmune process, it was decided to treat her with chemotherapy to suppress her immune system to try and turn off this autoimmune process.
To have to go through chemotherapy without the knowledge that this is a proven solution was a very hard thing to do.
We were hopeful that her symptoms would regress and we would gain the old Haven from age 2.
After receiving this course of chemotherapy, Haven showed a number of improvements. Her blood pressure was back down to normal. In addition, her weight appeared to stabilize. We don't know whether those improvements are temporary or whether they're permanent. We're cautiously optimistic that they're going to be long-lasting, but we will have to watch her over time.
And while they are thrilled with Haven's recovery, Misty and Chris can't help but wonder why no other doctor was able to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
ROHAD is very difficult to diagnose because it's so rare. There's only been about 50 cases ever described in the whole world's literature. In addition, the features of ROHAD syndrome are all seemingly unrelated, making it even more difficult to put them together into a single diagnosis.
Today, Ricky has made a full recovery and is enjoying his senior year of high school to the fullest.
Ricky is 5'9". Never thought I'd see that day when he hit 5'9". Really, never thought I'd see that day.
Now I'm 18. I love just hanging out with friends, going outside, throwing the Frisbee around, just anything a normal teenager would like to do.
It's great to see him come from what he was at 5.5 years old, weighing 25 pounds, to 18 years old and being 5'9". It is great. It's an answer to prayer.
I think it's helpful for other kids with RSS to meet me, hear my story and all that, because they can see someone that has RSS just like them and know that they're not out of luck. They look up to me and they can see that they won't always be the small kid at school.
We've been extremely blessed. I mean, I feel like we've had so many miracles. Ricky's happy, he's healthy, he's got a great self-esteem, and he's turned out to be just an awesome young man. And as a mom, what more could you ask for?
We'll be there. We'll support him all the way in everything he does. We've done that ever since he started this journey, and we'll be with him the whole time.
My parents never gave up. They kept fighting for an answer, pushing for an answer, kept going to all these doctors to see why I was so small. If they hadn't have kept pushing, I would not be as tall as I am. I'd like to thank my parents for never giving up on me and finding an answer.
Today, Haven is back to loving life and head over heels about her new puppy.
I have a dog named Daisy, and she's a schnauzer. She barks at people, but she's a good snuggler.
She's off of chemotherapy, and her condition seems to be in remission.
We maintain a very strict diet still. Her weight is continually an issue, but at this point, if that's as bad as it's going to get, we'll be more than happy to deal with that.
Haven is in first grade now, full-time, and not missing a beat.
I'm happy that I'm at school because my friends are there. My favorite subject in school is art class. And when I grow up, I want to be a teacher.
I just hope for her a happy life and not limited by anything. And finding this diagnosis, I think she's got every opportunity to make whatever dreams she has a reality.